were we talking?
So it's December 20th. We're talking about Liberty Heights with Rabbi Ike Serotta.
And as I came in, you were talking about someone who made significant movies. Are you talking about Barry Levinson?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is, I think, the third one of his that we've watched, isn't it?
Have we?
Yeah, we watched, well, just in this group of 8 movies, we watched The Wizard of Lies with
Oh,
Robert.
that's by him. I didn't know that.
That's a Barry Levinson movie. And Bugsy that we watched the last time around, I think, is
Yeah.
also a Barry Levinson movie. Um, uh, he's made several movies that take place in and around Baltimore, including this one, which is his hometown. He's not the only Baltimore filmmaker who makes most of his movies around Baltimore. John Waters is also a Baltimore native and makes his movies about Baltimore. But Barry Levinson's first movie as a director is called Diner, which came out in 1982. And by the way, if you're a fan of Diner, you would notice in this movie that when they go to the diner, I think it's on the night of Halloween in this movie, they run into some other guys who are sitting at a different table, and they're the characters from the movie Diner, right? At a different age than they are in the movie Diner. But Diner is about mostly Jewish guys sitting around talking in a diner, and um, whatever they do in their everyday lives, they meet up at the diner and they talk to each other about it. It's a movie that's definitely about Jews in Baltimore, but you don't really know it until virtually the end of the movie when there's a wedding scene and they're all wearing kippot. So, but very interesting. Another movie we could watch in another series might be Avalon, which again is about Jewish family life in and around Baltimore. He also made a movie called Tin Men that takes place there about aluminum siding salesmen. It's he's had quite a career. I mean, those alone, last week we talked about Steven Spielberg and the movies that he's been nominated for and the movies that he hasn't been nominated for. I think if Steven Spielberg wasn't around, we'd probably think of Barry Levinson as the best Jewish director out there, right? He made the movie Rain Man. He made Good Morning Vietnam. Mentioned Bugsy already. He made The Natural with Robert Redford, based on a story by Bernard Malamud. So quite a career. Also, as a producer and director, was responsible for a TV series called Homicide, which takes place in Baltimore. And, one of the stars of that show just passed away last week. What is his name?
Andre Power.
Yeah, Andre Brower.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of good work in Barry Levinson's career. He started out really writing. We've done his biography a little bit before, but he started out in comedy writing. He won 2 Emmys when he was pretty young, writing for the Carol Burnett Show, and he also worked with Mel Brooks. Among his first screenplay work was Mel Brooks' parody movies, Silent Movie and High Anxiety, the Alfred Hitchcock parody. So he had that sort of background behind him before he wrote Diner in 1982. This movie, Liberty Heights, came out in 1999. We did kind of a quick shift to this one. It wasn't on our original syllabus because a movie that I like very much, Next Stop Greenwich Village, we just can't find in any format that you guys can watch. So we'll keep trying to find that one and let you know. But this actually kind of fits in. I thought it was a pretty good, pretty acceptable substitute for the other one. I mean, they are both movies in a sense about coming of age. you know, pairing it with what we saw last, and particularly about sort of Jewish artists, in a way, coming of age. In The Fabelmans, of course, it's Steven Spielberg becoming director. In this movie, it's really partly an autobiographical tale about Barry Levinson growing up in Baltimore and becoming a writer and director. So he wrote and directed this movie. You may remember that he's credited as a writer on The Wizard of Lies also, but along with his son at that point, wrote this screenplay with him for Wizard of Lies. So, this movie, of course, takes place in Baltimore in the early 1950s, around the time of the Supreme Court's Brown versus the Board of Education ruling that struck down separate but equal, and so the beginnings of integration, and so an interesting backdrop to this. I mean, there's a little talk among some of the men about Joe McCarthy and that kind of stuff, and the starting out of Joe McCarthy and that part of the Red Scare during that time. So an interesting historical backdrop to tell essentially three interlocking stories about three different Jewish men and their relationships, right, in the world, right? So there's the father who owns the burlesque theater, which is really just a cover for the money he's making as part of the numbers racket. And yeah, there's a picture of the actor here, continuing our trend of Jewish characters not played by Jewish actors. So Joe Mantegna is of Italian ancestry, but here he plays Nate Kurtzman. We actually saw another movie, I think maybe last go round, Homicide by David Mamet. And Joe Mantegna plays the Jewish police detective in that movie as well. So he's been around in a lot of movies, perhaps best known now for being in the TV series Criminal Minds, which has gone on for many seasons on television. So, so a
Rabbi,
pretty successful guy. Yes.
I just wanted to mention to you, Joe Mantegna's brother, Ron Mantegna, teaches at the Northfield Senior Center. And
Wow.
I take a current events class with him, and he is extremely pro-Israel and very, very close to a lot of Jewish people. And I found it interesting that here his brother was playing a Jewish father wearing a talit and everything else.
And they're both from my old neighborhood, the Chicago West Side.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know his brother at all. That's interesting to hear.
He's a very nice man.
He's played these two, at least these two roles. I think he's probably played Jews in other movies too. But it is interesting, as we've noted week after week, of casting non-Jews in the role of Jews. Anyway, so we have these three integrated stories. Integrated's a funny word in this movie, but three stories about, so it's about the father, and then it's about the two brothers, right? So one of them, Van, played by Adrian Brody, who has a Jewish father, but says he was raised without religion in his household, but best known probably for winning the Oscar for the Roman Polanski movie, The Pianist. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, a role for which he learned how to play the piano, by the way. It's actually very much, I guess, in the method school. I mean, he lost a lot of weight playing this role of the pianist. I was surprised to see that he's actually the youngest actor to win an Oscar for Best Actor. When he won for The Pianist, he was 29 years old. I was really shocked that that's the youngest an actor has ever won the Oscar for Best Actor. He surpassed Richard Dreyfuss, who won when he was around 30. So I thought that was really fascinating, actually, and rather surprising. But he did win that Oscar. That was in, I think, 2003. And in 2014, he was nominated for an Emmy for playing Harry Houdini in a mini series that I'm pretty sure aired on the History Channel, if I remember correctly. I got his start in movies in a Woody Allen movie, New York Stories, back in 1989. So if he was 29 in 2000, he was a kid, right? In New York Stories. He's also a teenager, maybe in the movie King of the Hill, which is directed by Steven Soderbergh, another Jewish director in Hollywood. And another movie that I'd love to watch with you guys, but we can't seem to find a version of it on on any of the streaming things. So maybe one of these days. So Adrian Brody has one Jewish parent, and he's playing a Jewish character. Ben Foster is the third story, right? The younger son, and his friendship, romance with and a black girl in his class, played by Rebecca Johnson. She plays Sylvia. But Ben Foster actually is Jewish, and his character is also named Ben in this movie, Ben Kurtzman. He's been in a lot of things over the years, actually, but never quite, he hasn't become sort of a star. But he's got second billing in a lot of different things. So an interesting actor. I think he does a good job in this. He won a Tony in a restaged version of A Streetcar Named Desire. He plays Stanley Kowalski. So, those are
this looks like a recent role. He played a Holocaust survivor turned boxer in an HBO movie.
All right, we may have to look that one up. It's called The Survivor.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't think I've seen it. So
I haven't, for sure.
yeah. So although it sounds familiar, I think I may have watched it. That's I either watched it or read about it. I'll have to go back and look. So a couple of other people in the movie who you might recognize. Bebe Neuwirth, who plays the mom, Ada, in this movie, was maybe best known to TV watchers as Lilith on Cheers. Married to Dr. Fraser Crane. So she's actually played Lilith in, I think, actually 4 different TV shows. She's shown up as the character Lilith. It's funny, I can't think of someone whose persona on Broadway is more different from her persona on television. Because that character Lilith is supposed to be very buttoned up and repressed and things like that. But on Broadway, she won a Tony for her first Tony for a role in Sweet Charity. And then her second is Velma Kelly in the original Broadway cast of Chicago. She also had a small part in the other, one of the other Barry Levinson movies we watched, in Bugsy. She plays the Countess de Frasso, who he gets close to get information about the Nazis, right? If you remember that movie. She had a regular role in another TV series more recently, Madam Secretary. And she also was on Broadway in the musical version of The Addams Family that was on Broadway a few years ago. And she played Morticia in that. So an interesting career. And she is Jewish, right? As are a couple of the younger characters. Well, some of the other characters in this movie. David Krumholtz, who plays Yussel, the one who gets into a fight and then dyes his hair blonde the next time he's there. Right? He got his start in an Addams Family movie back in 1993 where he plays Wednesday Addams' love interest at summer camp in the movie Addams Family Values. But in more recent years, if you went out to see Oppenheimer in the theaters, he plays the Jewish physicist Isidore Rabi in Oppenheimer. There's a picture of him there on the right. You know, and he was also in the recent adaptation of the Philip Roth book, The Plot Against America. So he's made a career of playing Jewish characters in various movies, actually, including what was the name of? There was a show about 42nd Street called The Deuce on cable a few years ago, where he plays a Jewish pornographer in that series. So good character actor. You might have recognized Richard Klein, who plays one of Nate's assistants in the Burlesque House in the Numbers Game. Charlie is his character. He played Larry, Jack's friend on Three's Company, right? So when he was a younger man. So also from a Jewish background, right? The other, you might recognize Kevin Sussman, another Jewish character actor, best known for playing Stuart Bloom on The Big Bang Theory for several years.
Oh, yeah.
So, and someone else who became famous after this movie, or at least become big in TV, is Anthony Anderson. Right. So yeah, there's Kevin Sussman. So, I'd say that from this movie, the Liberty Heights, to now, he's sort of grown into his face, actually. So, and Anthony Anderson plays a character in this movie called Scribbles. He's the assistant henchman, whatever you like, to Little Melvin, played by Orlando Jones. So, and best known now, I think, for the TV series Black-ish, which he stars in. So, so a lot of interesting people, some of whom, right? So this is, you know, in some cases, people who have done a lot of acting and have continued on, become more famous since they were in this movie. Others have really very few, if any, other credits to their names. The actress who plays Dubby, for example, was a fashion model, Carolyn Murphy, and has only appeared in 2 or 3 things in her career. And the young woman who plays Sylvia, Rebecca Johnson, I don't think is acting anymore, as far as I can tell. But it's a pretty nice ensemble of a cast, well put together. And as I said, it's sort of these 3 intertwining tales, and the movie is always sort of visually and orally interesting. You know, that you'll hear music from one thing, from one segment, one story, overlapping with parts of the other story. One good example early on is when they're at High Holy Day services, and the dad says, which is something he apparently says every year, I'll be back soon. And he leaves to go over to the Cadillac dealership to look at the new Caddy, right? And but the sounds of the synagogue continue to play as he's looking at the new Cadillac. So it's kind of a there's kind of a pun, if you like, or you know, some kind of a little joke going on there, that the new Cadillac coming out is sort of part of the spiritual experience of the High Holy Days for the character, right? I'm, you know, when Tevye sings about tradition, well, this is his tradition, right? His tradition is to duck out of part of a very traditional High Holy Days, right? The men are sitting separately from the women, and go off and take a look at the new Cadillac. Uh, but there are a lot of times like that in this movie where the sound is from one of the three stories, while the action on screen is from another of them. Other times it's music from the burlesque house is going on, while something else is going on. There's a lot of interesting music in this movie. The music supervisor is a guy named Alan Mason. I don't think it's the Alan Mason from Miami, but I'm not sure, Carla. So it seems like a coincidence. But on the one hand, I will say that not all of the music, some of the music is very much in time, right? 1950, 1954. We hear the shake, rattle, and roll. We hear actually both versions. We hear Bill Haley and the Comets, which was the white radio version. And we also hear Big Joe Turner, which was the original version. So this movie makes some good use of how that, African-American music gets, appropriated by white musicians. Like I think there's a Pat Boone version of a Little Richard song in this movie as well. So, but you also get some Yiddish songs in here, and a song called Bells and Eufen Pripyat. But those recordings are not from 1950s. They're actually Mandy Patinkin singing those songs. And the same with some of the songs from the burlesque club are written and sung by Tom Waits, who's a modern and contemporary composer. So not anything that would have been around in the 1950s. But so there's an interesting mix. And even the music in the synagogue, I noticed in the credits, is the Bayom Hahu by Michael Isaacson. Michael Isaacson is alive and writing music right now, I think. So certainly this is not a 1950s setting of that. So the movie has this sort of mix of trying to be sort of like the movie American Graffiti, where all the music would have been what you heard on the radio in 1962. This movie has some of that, but it's also not afraid to throw in something completely different if it's right for the mood, if it's something that the director wants, So there's also a jazz singer in this movie. She appears in a couple of scenes and sings under the closing credits, I think, Brenda Russell. So if you followed all the way through the credits, you got to the last scene where she's singing, and the father, Joe Mantegna's character, shuts the door to the house and walks away. That's after the last line in the movie. The last image in the movie before the credits is the shot of the new Cadillac, right? Which is the 1955 Cadillac, and then the credits start to roll. So I think it's a Cadillac convertible too. So there's some voiceover at the beginning and at the end. At the end, there's a line I find lovely and poetic. If I knew some things would no longer be, I would have tried to remember better. I believe that's the last out loud line in the movie. So at the beginning, it's a story about the voiceover says that I grew up in this northwest section of Baltimore. I just assumed everyone was Jewish. In second grade, I thought Ping Der was Jewish, right? So and so there's a little bit of a kind of setting the stage at the beginning of the movie, right? So, what did the world look like, right? He goes to have lunch at a friend's house, and they serve luncheon meat. There's a conversation with his mother about, no, it's just called luncheon meat, right? What was it? Bologna? Luncheon meat, right? With mayonnaise and milk.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, um, so
He says everything was white.
yeah, right. Yeah, he never had raw bread before, I think.
Right, Rob.
Yeah. So, um, and his mother says, well, they must not be Jewish. They're the other kind, right? And that becomes a thing that gets mentioned a couple of times in the movies. And we've also got a scene looking in at the pool at the Turkey Hills Swim Club with the sign that says no Jews, dogs, or colored. And there's a pretty humorous little discussion about that. How did they decide what order to put on the sign, right? And which it's kind of extraordinary if you think about it. I never really, until they start talking about it, you don't really think about the order per se. And they sort of rationalize that, well, they've never actually seen Black people swim, right? So they're thirds. So because they don't come anyway, right? But Jews, of course, swim, but they can't swim here, so they're first. And then they can't decide why dogs are on there at all, since the dogs can't read. So, but it sets the scene pretty effectively, I'd say, right? And then there's a little bit of voiceover about the new integration law coming into existence and how things were going to change in their schools, right? So, so a lot of interesting, I would say, discrete scenes that add up to these things sort of coming together. But in some ways, each of the three sort of plays out in its own arc in its own way, right? So the story of Ben and Sylvia, is sort of one of them. And the story of Van and Dubby is another one. And of course, the father and his connection with the guy who actually wins the lottery, right? Played by Orlando Jones, Little Melvin. And in the end, they say that he really gets arrested and sent to jail, not because he was doing something immoral at the burlesque theater or something illegal in the numbers game, but that he was in business with a Black man in Baltimore in 1954, right? Is actually what seals his fate and gets the FBI interested in him. So, it's a pretty interesting document about the time period and the place, as well as the role of Jews in society at that time, right? So we're in this place where when the NAACP was founded, the presidents of the NAACP were Jews, and Jews were some of the colored people, right? And so here in the 1950s, we're at this point where Jews are becoming white people in America. So I think it's an interesting moment in time. So happy to hear your thoughts. Anything stand out for you in this movie?
Susan.
Yeah. Rabbi, do you think there are a lot of stereotypes in this movie? The way people behave, even the way the Black guy, Little Melvin, the way he talks, the way he behaves, and the Jewish kids, especially Yussel, so many stereotypes. And then the guy who played Trey, the Gentile boyfriend of Dubby, just so Gentile. You know, I,
Yeah.
I think that when you're looking at these characters, not that today we look at these people with stereotypes, but I think at that time, the behavior in the movie, I think Barry Levinson did a magnificent job in making them so stereotypical.
Yeah, you know, it's not subtle, right?
Right.
You know, this movie's not about sort of subtle nuance. In the movie Diner, one of the characters says that, you know what word I'm uncomfortable with in English? Nuance. He says either a thing is or it isn't, you know, right? And this movie is kind of an example of this, right? Yeah, there's some depth to it, but not, you know, it's not exactly nuanced, right? So, you know, stereotypes are, I mean, it's an interesting concept and an interesting word, right? I mean, because, you know, there's some truth, some kernels of truth in a stereotype, right? But all of us also transcend that stereotype, right?
Right.
But, you know, in a certain sense, right, if you couldn't depend on an apple to taste like an apple, you know, I mean, you have to have a stereotype of an apple, right? You have to know what an apple is, what it looks like, what it tastes like. That way you can look at one and say, oh, that one's not good. I'm not going to eat that. You know, so there's a certain amount of sort of like, you know, we talk about Jewish humor. I mean, is Jewish humor different than other humor? Yes and no, right? I mean, there's a certain element of it that, oh, that's Jewish. I see how that's Jewish. But then, you know, it's the diner characters, you know, in that movie really make me think of this. I watched that whole movie thinking that this is a lot like me and my friends hanging around, you know, and then at the end, when they put on kippot and they're at a Jewish wedding, it's like, oh, of course, right? Now I recognize them, you know. So he's playing with that a bit, I think, right? As he does in a lot of his movies. I see Sandy's hand and Alice and then Elaine.
I did get a big kick out of the boy going to have lunch at his friend's house and getting white bread, because I remember that we didn't eat like that at our house. And if I went to a friend's house, they'd serve Wonder Bread or maybe something even worse than that. And they would call it lunch meat that they put on there. And I didn't know what lunch meat meant. I think it was bologna made from pork. But when I saw that in the movie, it reminded me of my mother, who, bless her, if it rained during the school day, I knew she wasn't going to let me walk home. She would meet me at the school with an umbrella, and we would go to one of two places. One was Samuel's Delicatessen on the west side, right where the Montagnas grew up too. And that was a big place, Samuel's Delicatessen. And we had corned beef sandwiches for lunch. And then she walked me back to school with the umbrella. God forbid, you know, I should be walking in the rain.
Yeah.
And then if we didn't go to Samuel's, if it was raining real hard, we stopped before Samuel's and we went to Steinway's Drugs. And I came from a kosher home. My mother always had a kosher home, but she would go in there and she would order me a BLT with a milkshake on the side. That was a big treat too.
Yeah.
So I looked for rainy days.
Okay. Alice? You're still muted, Alice.
I unmuted you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Vanessa. I like the way he kind of led you to think one thing and then turned it on its side or upside down. And one of the scenes I'm thinking of is how during Rosh Hashanah services, how the father, very quietly, said goodbye to the boys and got up and went to the back and took his talit off. And because I grew up partially at a conservative synagogue, and it was like people going in and out all the time during services, and that's what the men would do. I mean, they weren't going out to buy a Cadillac, but they were going out to go to the bathroom, have a smoke, whatever they were doing, and then come back. But I like that he played on it like, well, this is like a normal thing for a observant Jewish man to do during services. You very respectfully walk out quietly, but not to go and buy the Cadillac and never come back to the service.
Right. Yeah.
So-
And in more momentous ways, you have this too, right? I mean, that's, Van meets Dubby and falls hard for her, before he knows anything, about her, right? And so, she's set up to be the princess, and then it turns out maybe not so much. And Trey, on the other hand, is set up to be the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
But turns out maybe, you imagine at the end of this movie, Trey and Van are friends, and Dubby's not involved with either one of them, right?
Mhm.
So you're right. I mean, he takes some of what he leads us down a path and then gives us the switcheroo. There. So, and does that a few places, right? I like the way he portrays the characters of Ben and what is her name? Sylvia, right? And how chaste their relationship is. I mean, I think a lot of other movies would go in a much more carnal direction. They are, what's really exciting about his relationship with Sylvia is the music he gets to hear, right? It's a completely different world opens up to him. And I believe he's the stand-in for the filmmaker, right? I mean, this is the Barry Levinson character. And it's, an artistic awakening as much as it's a sexual awakening, right, for him. Even their kiss at the end is a pretty, minor league kiss as movies go, right? But it has the desired effect on both sets of parents. So the rebellious streak that they both start to show. Nicely done.
We have Elaine, then Linda.
Okay, what stood out for me mostly was the relationship with the black girl and the parents' reaction, because I know this is really real and I know that it really happened in one instance, that the black girl's parents were the ones that were the most anti of the relationship, and he made quite a thing about them not having a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, look, and in some quarters this is still an issue, and in others it's not. I mean, it's still relatively unusual, even in society today. By the way, more and more in the Jewish community, 25% of young Jews identify as not white. So it's interesting to see how the stereotypical concept of who is a Jew and what a Jew looks like and things like that are disappearing. Linda? Unmute. Yeah.
Mute myself.
Yeah.
I wanted to just have some observations of the movie. I watched it with my husband. I think he enjoyed it more than I did. I think young men at that time could relate to this movie. I found it very cute. I really enjoyed it. I could relate to a lot of the stuff that was going on. I know that they're older than I am, but I really loved the grandmother in this movie. I just love the part, and some of her stuff was so typical of a movie. The other stuff I found a little strange, but the grandmother I could really visualize and see her in it.
Comment too, okay.
And so
Gonna talk?
she was just very right on with what her act when she saw and her listening on the telephone. That was very typical at that time.
Yeah.
And just going in another room and sitting and listening and wringing her hands. And I thought when he came down the stairs in the Nazi uniform, that was the best scene of all. I mean, I can't visualize any of the fellas that I knew, how crazy they are and what they would do, would come in as a Nazi or as Adolf Hitler. That was really over the top.
Yeah, it is. As I said, not subtle, right? The movie is not subtle. But actually, one of my favorite lines in the movie is Joe Mantegna, he says, "Put the Fuhrer on the phone."
Like that one too.
I thought the whole scene was hysterical. It was very, very funny.
And I like sort of Ben's, reaction to, well, you guys go on without me. I'm gonna have, trying to save face. I'm just gonna stay home with family tonight.
Think what the men can, the young fellas in the room or who are watching can also relate to was he was in Sylvia's bedroom and she touched him.
Yes.
And of course that happened and it was very funny to me.
Yeah.
My husband had a chuckle when he saw that. And I think that most young men can relate to that whole issue. So
again, not subtle.
no, it was not so.
But yeah, I mean, very interesting, right? And I think I do think that Barry Levinson writes dialogue for men very well, right? I mean, I think that's why I said when I saw Diner, I recognized myself and my friends in it. It's men and women. I think I don't think we can answer whether it's nature or nurture, but they bond very differently, right? And men bond over these discussions of what kind of animal is Goofy, right? In the old Disney, right? Mickey is a mouse and Pluto is a dog. What is Goofy, right? And guys, which superhero can beat up which superhero, right? These are conversations that guys have and bond over those kinds of things, right? And I think he writes that kind of dialogue very, very well. So I do like this.
All the stuff that went on in the locker room, I won't go into it, but Steve was hysterical when he was watching it. This is all male growing up and all the misinformation that they had.
Right.
And his friend was saying, well, who told you that? Well, everybody knows that, it's common knowledge.
Right.
So I think that was the time then, or maybe it still is. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Hubie?
Yeah, I have a question. On these movies, I'm looking at the end, the number of people that were in here, the cost of these things has to be horrendous. And yet, how do they hope to make a profit when I think that they're really aimed towards, say, a very limited market, the Jewish market?
Yeah.
How is it profitable?
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting question, Hubert, that is very, there's somebody who's counting the pennies for sure when they're doing this. And so some movie will, have a budget of $40 million, but it's expected to make $400 million, right? And then a movie like this may be budgeted at $2 or $3 million, which sounds like a huge amount of money, but is expected to make $10 or $12 million, right? So in either case, you're expecting, you know, a return on your investment, right? But no one makes this movie thinking it's going to be, you know, the Marvel Avengers movie. You know, no one think, you know, when Steven Spielberg makes the Fablemans, he, you know, now he's really, actually maybe both these guys fall into this category now. They can make what they want. I mean, if they can get the financing for it, right? You know, so people will say to Spielberg, "Oh, sure, we'll finance the Fablemans. Will you do Jurassic Park 5?" Right? And that's how that works, right? You know, so there are a lot of directors and movie makers who go sort of back and forth between movies that are more commercial. You know, in Barry Levinson's career, it might be something like Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams. You know, that again, not expected to be the Avengers and make billions, but you know, very successful movie. Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, a very successful movie, right? So they're able in some ways to parlay those big successes into these smaller movies that are expected only to be small successes. But really, all anybody's interested in it is it going to make more than it cost us? And it's a gamble, but they, you know, the people who do this stuff know what they're doing, right? By and large. And if they make a mistake, they write it off, you know, right? So, you know, but it is interesting, and it's been interesting in the history of motion pictures. I mean, we started out early on with the Jazz Singer, you know, 1927, the first talkie. They decided, what should we make the first talkie about? Let's make it about the son of a rabbi who becomes a, you know, a vaudeville star, right? You know, who thought that's commercial success? We're gonna make a lot of money on the Jazz Singer. But they know, even then they knew the market, right? You know, in those days, I mean, movies were largely an urban thing anyway. Movie theaters were in cities, not out in the countryside. Now the landscape's completely changed with cable TV and streaming services and things like that. There are multiple different revenue streams. So some of these small movies actually are more likely to get made now than they were 30 years ago, because they may not make money in a movie theater, but they'll sell it to Netflix and they'll make some money there, right? Or to HBO or whatever. So so interestingly, I mean, the place that we're in now with all these different streaming services, some of these little movies actually find financing. But it is an interesting question. It does speak to Jews being overrepresented in Hollywood. You know, one of those things that we can say, but we get mad when other people say. There are a lot of Jews in Hollywood, and they like to tell these stories. You know, so
Thank you.
yeah. I see.
Sandy?
When you talked about him coming downstairs in the Nazi uniform, which was really pretty shocking, it reminded me how Prince Harry, if you remember,
Yeah.
he came down, he went to a, I
Costume.
don't know if it was a Halloween party, but it was some kind of a dress up party in England. And he was dressed as a Nazi, and that made all the magazine covers. And really, it was pretty disgusting. I think it was held against him for a long time.
Yeah. Be interesting to see what year that was.
Yes, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. I have to say, you know, it's not that I don't object to the fact that he came up with that costume. I kind of objected to how good the costume was. This movie, right? Where did you find that stuff in Baltimore in 1954? Right? You know,
Well, he said he had to go look for it and get the boots. He did comment on that.
Right, but where do you get a Nazi armband that's professionally printed in 1954 Baltimore?
Yeah.
Right? you know, and it's got to be somebody's war relic collection, you know, something that somebody brought home from World War II. But even then,
So,
I sort of object to him being so good at it. You know?
so Prince Harry did the Nazi costume in 2005.
Mhm.
And Neil has been in the comments. First, he said something about Woody Allen being like Barry Levinson, and then Barry Levinson is a genius of finding young talent at the beginning of their careers, which I agree with. But for me as a woman, Neil, Woody Allen is tainted. He is. He's been Me Too'd. And it's another discussion, which is why I waited until 2:54 to bring it up. But you can't discuss him without discussing some of the absolutely horrible things he did to his family and women.
I agree with you, Vanessa.
Yeah, look, I'm no question, Vanessa. I do think that probably when it comes to Hollywood, however, it's the people that we know about and the people that we don't know about yet.
I agree.
Comes to
We
this stuff.
we once had a whole discussion at a holiday table of like, who would you be surprised about if it came out they were unfaithful or I know. Look at Alice's face. We said, well,
Right.
Stephen Colbert, Barack Obama.
Right. So
Well,
I,
remember Roman Polanski?
I was just going to
Yes.
mention that
Yeah.
because
And
we talked about
yesterday something came out about Alec Baldwin in taking the side of Palestinians.
that was there's a bizarre story there. I'm not sure I've heard all of it, but I was just reading he was at some kind of rally, but then he got confronted by pro-Palestinian people because he wasn't pro-Palestinian enough. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not sure about all the details of that one yet, but but we'll hear more. But yeah, Roman Polanski, it's a very sad story in many ways, but we mentioned him today because we talked about Adrian Brody winning the Oscar for a brilliant movie directed by Roman Polanski, the pianist,
Yeah.
So that's the dilemma we find ourselves in, is that when sometimes these people who have become tainted in some ways, have made movies that are indelible, right? So, we don't overlook who they are or what they've done, but we, should we never see their movies ever again? I mean, it may be different, going forward. Should someone give Woody Allen money to make new movies? No, probably not. But do we never watch Annie Hall again?
Right. But now when you watch Manhattan, it's just creepy.
Yeah.
Creepy. I'm Alice. And you need to unmute.
I thought it was creepy then, actually, Right? I mean, I think that story is creepy. And I don't think that he thinks that it isn't creepy when he made it, right?
No, I was just gonna say this topic that we've just gotten onto about artists and then you don't like their person. I know there's been a lot written. I've read recently, there's been a lot of books written about this. Like, do you cancel Picasso? Do you can't, I'm just saying one person. I mean, the visual arts and the musical arts, the movie arts, I mean, you could go on and on and on. I don't know. I don't have the answer. But yes, as you just said, it's a discussion for another time. I mean, that's a big discussion.
But I just said, the shortest thing I can say about it is there's a big difference between saying, let's give, Woody Allen $20 million to make a movie, and saying, I'm never going to watch anything he ever made again. Right. Especially if you check it out from the library or you get it from some free source, right? It doesn't, you know what I mean? So it's not money in his pocket when you do that, right? So I would say that's a big difference, actually.
Sorry, Neil.
But it also doesn't negate what Neil said about people who find young talent.
Yeah,
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, there's no question about it, right? And for years, everybody wanted to be in a Woody Allen movie. You know, if you look at the roster of actors who appear in Woody Allen movies, you know, he could get people to be in movies and have one line, you know, right? Once they're already famous. I mean, they just to say they
yeah,
did
Yeah.
on a set with him,
Yeah.
right? So, anyhow, well,
Okay, it's 2:59. It's great seeing everyone. This is the last in this Jewish Real Classics. I'm sure we'll be back, right, Rabbi?
yeah, you know, I've got a stack lined up already.
Okay, good. Good,
We
good,
just have
good.
to make sure we can find them all on online.
That's really the most challenging part of this class.
Right.
And so just watch your Macomb at home. We're winding down, but we are always open for Shabbat and services and Torah study and minyan. So, and if you need anything, you know where to find me.
So next week our office is actually closed.
Oh, yeah.
uh,
Yes.
So we can give our maintenance crew some time off when the school is off and things like that. But you can still reach people by phone and whatever if you need us. But we'll turn down the heat for a week too. Although we may not need the heat next week from what I'm.
Well, it's climate change. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Take
All
care.
right. Bye-bye,
Thanks for-
everyone.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Charlie Chaplin. Neil just giving me all of these people.
That we can't watch anymore.
We
Right.
could do a Jewish Real Classics on people who've been Me Too'd. All right.
Look, you know, producers. You know, that guy produced a lot of movies with Jewish content.
Harvey Weinstein.
Right.
We
Produced a
can go
lot of
on
movies
forever.
with Jewish content. We've
Yeah.
watched, I think, at least one.
I'm sure we did. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.